So this is the Faith and Life podcast at St. Luke Lutheran Church. And so we were at a Orange conference, sitting outside at lunchtime and thinking about the stories we heard and people sharing their experiences with faith and life. And we thought, what if we had a podcast around that?
Yeah, because I think it brought us back to the idea we used to do faith story videos here at St. Luke, and the idea of how people can resonate and connect with, a story and go like, you went through that same stuff that I did. And we just thought, how can we bring those back? How can we maybe set it up in a new way to get more exposure to people, and maybe if they miss it on a Sunday, they can still hear, the stories that people have.
Yeah, and that's the one thing over my course of being a pastor and Greg, you would have the same situation where, I get to hear stories of people's stories of their experiences with this, that, or the other thing, and how they've gone from point A to point B and had some triumph in it, some victories, some deeper meaning, some joys, and even some sorrow in the midst of it. And I always feel like it's a privilege to listen to those stories, and I'm so grateful that I get to do it. But I always feel like, man, I want to I want to get these out, because there's such amazing stories, and people don't think they have amazing stories, but they do, because their lives are interesting.
It is, and I mean, this is so prevalent right now, because I've just started rewatching like documentaries and stuff on Netflix and things, and the sports documentaries, and I'm like, I love hearing the stories of people, and you go from tragedy sometimes to triumph, and it just is so powerful because your story is something that is unique to you, but it also is something that people can see and go, you know what? I went through that same thing, and it's powerful to them, and you can connect with them, and and that's what we want to try and do, a broad scope, right? Of get as many different voices that we can, because you might not resonate with one, but you're going to go, what I do with the other, but hopefully you can still find some truth that you can take and glean from everyone's stories.
Yeah, truth, and be inspired by them, be encouraged by them, sometimes be challenged, to be challenged in thinking based on what somebody shares. And that's okay, because it just helps us grow and helps us understand each other. And that's really powerful and transformative, I think.
When you can sit down and have a conversation like this and get to just be across this, other side of the table from someone, it brings you into this reality of, what? We might not have the same views. We might not have the same ideas all the time, but we're still people, and we're having a conversation, and to be able to sit there and listen and hear, I think it's powerful. And I think the more we can have those conversations with people, I think the just better our lives and our world would be.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So like one of our core values at St. Luke is sweeping acceptance. And what that means is sweeping acceptance does not mean we're going to agree about everything.
Right.
It just simply means we're here to build bridges so that when we do disagree, we don't have to be disagreeable, and we don't have to walk away and turn our backs on each other. But we can stay in the same room. We can be in the same place and love each other and accept each other for who we are, recognizing that we're just all coming from different places sometimes. And but we hold that value of we accept you and whoever that you is, right, from their viewpoint, their whatever's going on, and that we are united not because we agree about everything. We are united in Christ, and that pulls us together. And He's the one who unifies us. And so we can hear these stories, we can have these experiences, and we resonate with some we might not, but it's all building us together as a community.
Yeah, and I think that's the main focus, right? If you can keep that Jesus is at the central of the conversation, and that's why we're here, I think we lose sight of that sometimes. I think we lose sight that we're all on the same team, even though we're going to have differences in views and things like that. It's kind of like you go to a sports bar and, it's an Ohio State sports bar or something, or a Bengals or Browns bar. You're hugging strangers that you don't even know when they score. Yep. You don't care what they think. You have one thing that is in common, and that's your sports team. Well, by golly, we got Jesus, which is a lot more important than that.
That's right.
which I almost feel like sacrilegious to say is more important than sports in Central Ohio. But
Well, I do think that Jesus is a Browns fan. I'm just saying. That's all I'm saying right now.
because he loves the loss.
He just loves the loss.
He loves
He's the page. He loves the down and out and the those kind of stories. That is for sure for the Browns. But that's a different topic. So here's the risk of hearing stories like this. Here's the risk, and I'm willing to take this risk. But here is the risk: is that people will hear stories of faith and life, and on one level be inspired by it. On a different level, they'll say, well, what about me?
Yeah.
You know, let me give you an example. So part of my faith story and of course of my Christian life and walking with God is that there have been crystal clear times where I've heard God speak. I mean, as you and I are sitting here, I'm telling you, I just know what I know. And I've heard and I've shared those stories, and people sometimes hear those stories and they go, well, I've not heard God speak. And then they make the next move. There must be something wrong with me. And that's not it at all. But that's the risk of sharing stories like this, because we don't want to have people go down that road. I mean, inevitably, we sometimes all do at some point. But that's not why we share the story. There's nothing wrong with any of us. It's just, sometimes like if I take that topic of hearing God, it's not the time. I mean, it's more about God, not about us.
Yeah.
And it's more about our relationship with God and how God uniquely speaks to us, as opposed to whether you or I hear from God. The issue is not that. And there's nothing wrong with us. It's just that it's about more organic as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, and I think that's also important too. And I think that's why we want to get such a wide variety of stories, because chances are you're going to hear a story that you go, I can't relate to that. I haven't gone through that, or because I haven't related to that, is there something wrong with me? And I've talked with you about that. I struggled with that as a kid. I'd go to these youth conferences and you'd have these testimonies of guys that were, went to jail and murdered somebody and, drugs, sex, rock and roll, all that stuff, right? And they found Jesus and they, sharing this testimony, and I was just like, grew up in the church since I was a baby. I didn't experience some of those times. And so I was like, do I have a real testimony? Do I have a real faith story? And I think that was this challenge for me as a kid. And so I think partially what we want to do with these testimonies is to find a wide variety too, because you want to see and hear all of them, because chances are you're not going to relate to every single story that or experience that someone went through. But I think we can still learn and grow from them.
Yeah, because one of the things I love about Jesus is that he's incredibly ordinary. He's the most ordinary of ordinary. We don't know what he looks like. We don't know what he dressed like. We put pieces together historically, but then nobody left us with a description. And he was described as meek and so on. And I think, and he showed up in an ordinary place, in an ordinary way, and in this out of the way place. And so what I love about that is that it reminds me of how ordinary life is where God shows up, and even in our lives. So it doesn't have to be this dramatic thing. It can be this ordinary, everyday existence that we see glimpses of God in our life. And that's where the intersection of faith and life happens, in the ordinary, as we are ordinary, not doing anything extraordinary. And out of that ordinary comes maybe something extraordinary, but it doesn't have to be. It can be something small and profound and deeply meaningful. And we might think it's just a throwaway story. We just think, oh, well, whatever, it just happened. No, the reality is that's where the beauty's happening. And we want to hear those things, because that's really inspiring, because that's 98% of us. That is us. We all live this ordinary life. We all get up and go through our day and then go to bed at night. Everybody does that every day.
Yeah.
And God shows up.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to remember too in the society, in the world that we live on, that's so online, right? Everything we do is online, and we post, Facebook and Instagram, and 9 times out of 10 we're posting the highlights. We're posting the highlight reel of our lives, and we get into that comparison game of, they're a perfect family, they had this perfect life, and that's not really probably a real snapshot of their life. It's just a glimpse of it, and so to have go through these conversations of these struggles and this ordinary life that you're talking about, I think is important too, because we are all just living life and trying to do our best and trying to make our way through it. And I think it's important for us to, as we look at these glimpses of these stories, to say like, oh, I don't have to compare myself to other people, and I can compare myself to me with my faith in God. And I think that's an important takeaway for us.
Yeah, so let me ask a risky question. Ooh. It might not feel, maybe not be risky, but it feels a little risky to me. And I preface it by saying it's simply a question. It's not, the question is this. Given your example about Instagram.
Yeah.
And I think about the Gospels. And the Gospels, it's not a chronological take on, it's not historical. It's historical, but it's not a chronological document of Jesus' life. It's not a biography that way. But what we are getting are glimpses of instances of Jesus' interactions with people that are historically valid, right? So my question is, and I never thought about this, is how is the gospel similar to Instagram in that way? And how are these stories that we'll hear, not Instagram-like in the sense that, how are these stories become a very small G, by no means canonical, that is, it's a fifth gospel, that is lived out God's grace in this world. We're writing our own story. And that's, it's not to diminish the four, that's the risk of that question, right?
Yeah.
I don't want people to misunderstand me. The four gospels are the four gospels,
right.
And we're not writing a new one. But in a sense, these stories are mimicking that.
Yeah, I can see you're getting glimpses of, you see in the gospel, you see stories of where Christ showed up, and you aren't getting it's not a biography, it's not a, week by week by week, this was his life, or year by year. I mean, we miss a whole chunk from childhood up till adulthood, still the career of ministry. And I think that's an interesting idea of how are these stories glimpses of our interactions with Christ. And because that is, I think that is essentially partially what you see in the Gospels, are glimpses of interactions with Jesus, but with other people and how they interact with their faith and their struggles. And almost be interesting to see of like what gospel stories like how you would make it an Instagram post.
Right. Oh, that's true. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. If Jesus had, I thought about this, if Jesus had an Instagram feed, what would he put on those pictures, those videos?
Yeah.
What would that be interesting to get it? Jesus had a TikTok. What TikTok videos would Jesus make? But, Zacchaeus, it was an ordinary day for Zacchaeus. He was an ordinary guy. People didn't like him, but he was just doing this ordinary thing. He tried to do something extraordinary that get into the tree to see this ordinary man, Jesus, and this extraordinary thing happened. But it's all based in ordinary, him making decisions that put him in a position where something bigger happened. But it's just these, and he didn't plan for it. It just happened.
Yeah, it's almost these extraordinary things happen out of these ordinary events. You talk about Zacchaeus, right? Like, he heard Jesus was there, and so people do try and find the way, they will pop up. Take the story of the four friends who are bringing their friend to go see Jesus who's paralyzed. The people in the midst of that house and that time with Jesus, it was probably an ordinary event. It was an ordinary time, but people put themselves in a position to be around Christ and to experience Christ. And through that ordinary start, you had an extraordinary thing happen. And I wonder how much do we as a people sometimes try to look for the extraordinary before we start in the ordinary. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Because we want the extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so we try to make the extraordinary happen. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It has to start in the ordinary. Interesting. Well, there we are. This is our podcast, Faith and Life Podcast, St. Luke. We're going to interview people like you and me, and just like anybody, and hear these stories. So I'm looking forward to the journey.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be fun to have conversations about faith and life and, that intersection, because it's something that I think is just very impactful for us all. And I love this idea of looking for the extraordinary out of the ordinary.
That's right. So hey, come along on the journey with us. If you have stories for us, you want to share your story, certainly reach out to us. We're around. Obviously, you know who we are. If you go to St. Luke, if you're not going to St. Luke, you can look us up somewhere. I don't know. But in the meantime, yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, and I think if like you said, if you have stories that you want to tell, or you have thoughts of like questions that you want to have talked about, like let us know. I mean, we're just trying to figure out this podcast a little bit too, of like what do we want it to be, and how can we want it to just be in something that is encouraging to you, but something that you might be able to take away and say, man, that was some good stuff today.
Yeah, and it's a work in progress.
Yeah,
and at least we're in progress.
Yeah,
that's all that matters.
That's it.
Yep. Let's go.
All right.